As we start today's episode, I want to tell you about an opportunity to keep growing connected going strong by giving to christianparenting.org. Growing Connected is part of the Christian Parenting Podcast Network, which is reaching over 500,000 moms and dads with trusted guidance every month. Besides producing podcasts like Growing Connected, Christian Parenting also develops books, workbooks, prayer journals, and other practical tools to help parents like us. So today, text CPGIVE to 474747 to make a generous donation. That's CPGIVE to 474747. When you do, you'll be entered into a drawing to win the Perfectly Imperfect Parenting Bundle, which is full of great parenting resources. Again, to share this message of hope and freedom to more moms and dads, please give generously today by texting CPGIVE to 474747. You can also give by visiting cpgive.org. Christian Parenting is 100% donor-funded and relies on listeners like you to support the future creation of parenting resources. So thank you for giving generously today.
Christian Parenting.
Hello and welcome to the Growing Connected podcast. My name is Amy Olrick and I'm here with my husband Jeffrey Olrick. Jeffrey is a child psychologist and we are parents and authors, and together we've written the book The 6 Needs of Every Child, Empowering Parents and Kids Through the Science of Connection.
In my work as a therapist, I see both the joy and the pain families experience in their journey together. We all feel stuck and disconnected at times.
This season, we're talking about the science we present in our book and discussing the exciting ways we see faith and science coming together to point families to health and connection. We want to help parents understand their kids' instincts to move away from them to learn and explore when things are going well and to draw close when things are hard. As an attachment researcher, Jeffrey has identified 6 things our kids need to do both of those things well, and we've turned those needs into a compass. Last week we talked about delight, the first need on the exploration side of the 6 needs compass. This week we'll talk about support, the second explore side need. Jeffrey and I are first going to talk about support together, and then we invite Daniel and Christina Im into the conversation. We'll talk about what support looks like in their family, including how understanding support made Daniel be a better video game player with his kids during lockdown. Now that's a parenting goal we can definitely get behind right now. So Jeffrey, when we define support on the 6 needs compass, what are we really talking about?
Well, all of our children are born into the world not knowing very much, but they have an instinct to figure things out as best they can and as soon as they can, and they get themselves into a lot of trouble, and they don't understand things, and they need our help.
Yeah.
And they are going to be grown-ups one day in charge of themselves, in charge of their own families or communities, and there's a lot to learn between now and then. Some things that they will want to learn, and a lot of things that they won't necessarily be interested in learning, at least at the time, but will be important for them to learn. And support is an important need through that whole developmental process.
So when you were getting your PhD and then in your early years of working at the Child Parent Attachment Clinic at the University of Virginia, you did a lot of work with at-risk kids and families and did a lot of coding of interactions between parents and kids. What did you look for when you looked for signs of healthy support between parents and kids?
So in the strain situation, which is the procedure we use to measure a parent and child and their bond with each other and what's going on at a deeper level in their relationship, we measure support primarily in the part of that episode where they're just sitting in a room surrounded by a bunch of toys, which have been placed there by the researchers to see what a child does playing with their parent present. And healthy support in that context, in that situation, really just looks like watching, observing, tracking, naming things that your child is doing, and stepping in when they run into some sort of trouble. Something's not working, they don't understand what something is, and they use their parent to make better sense of the world. And the key part there is the parent's ability to step in, provide enough information, enough support without taking over. So that's what healthy support looks like in the strange situation, but that's a play situation. In the real world, support often is much more relevant to those day-to-day experiences where we, the adults, have decided there's something for our child to learn and master that they don't necessarily want to be doing. It's not a play situation. The two biggies being probably chores and schoolwork. That's the thing that we, as the adults, have decided. You need to learn this. You need to work at this. You need to master this. And so good support looks a little bit different in that situation. And there's a load of research which really helps us understand what children need to learn and master those things successfully.
Yeah, and something that was interesting to me when we were pulling all the research together and I was thinking about stories to add to the book is how much we really can over-support our kids. I'm someone who leans in the direction of doing for instead of letting my kids kind of find their way and make mistakes, quote unquote, fail on their own. And that was really interesting to me to see how if I would just make space for them to do more figuring out, that's where real learning happens. That's what we're finding out. That's really how they start to develop their own sense of autonomy and competency because they think, okay, well, that didn't go so well for me. I can make a mistake and try again. And someone like me who has a tendency to jump in and do is often struggles with not giving them the opportunity to learn to try again. And in those two things that you mentioned, I mean, chores and schoolwork, there are reasons why we as parents may jump in. We want them to do well in school. There is a need. We want them to both excel for their own good so that we might look good. There's a million different things. Often it's fear and love all mixed together, why we can tend to over support our kids in academics. In the world of chores and other things, we want it done a certain way, and we might not be happy with how our kids are doing, so we jump in. But what we learn over time and through this research that you're doing and that we're trying to present is that when we do that, when we jump into over support, we're really stealing an opportunity from our kids to learn to master on their own.
And Amy, you've used an important word there, and I want to come back to it. You use the word autonomy, and that is a word that comes from this research, this big area of research. But it's a term that I think parents can misinterpret or misunderstand. They may see autonomy, autonomy is important for my children, as doing whatever they want. They just decide for themselves. And I want to make the important distinction that autonomy is not about being able to just decide for yourself what is best, because part of healthy support is I step in and help you understand and do things that you don't appreciate the importance of or can really grasp yourself at this moment. And so autonomy, I want people to really understand what that is about a child or a person having a sense that they have a say in their situation, that they have a voice in whatever it is, the thing that is so important to somebody that I have to press into. And the situation where we find ourselves as parents stepping in or taking over or insisting under threat of carrot or stick is it robs that voice. It takes that voice away. And what happens, and this is what I want parents to really take time with and reflect on, is that if children do things just under carrot or stick or people are taking over for them, they don't carry it forward with them into the future. They do the thing just as long as you're making them, if you can. And then when you're gone and those carrots or sticks are gone in their life, then they do what they want to do.
Yeah.
And we, as parents, most of all, we're doing these things because we see them as good things. We want our children to take them with them into the world. And so taking a pause, letting them have choices, valuing how they're experiencing the thing, that helps them feel like, okay, I'm owning this for myself and I will carry this forward myself even when you're not around, Mom or Dad.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's finding the proper balance of that. It's that, all right, yes, they do need our help. And so we can step in sometimes if we see them struggling, if we know that, oh, this is something that we know that they're going to have to do, that they wouldn't learn on their own. But then also we can learn to step back when the time is right, so that over time, even if it looks like a mess right now, over time they will learn how to do things better on their own.
And the conversation you're about to hear is a wonderful conversation exploring how those things play out.
And before we begin, I want to make sure listeners know that this show is brought to you in part by our friends over at ChristianParenting.org. Christian Parenting is 100% donor funded and relies on listeners like you to support the future creation of parenting resources. So if you've been enjoying this podcast, please make a donation to Christian Parenting by texting CPGive to 474747. You can also give by visiting cpgive.org. Now we're thrilled to welcome Daniel and Christina Im into the discussion. Daniel and Christina are parents and hosts of the IMbetween podcast, and Daniel is also a pastor and author of the book, You Are What You Do, and 6 Other Lies About Work, Life, and Love.
Daniel, Christina, I am so excited to talk to you guys today, and it's so great to reconnect. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having us, Jeffrey and Amy. It is always, honestly, such a pleasure to reconnect and to talk with one another.
Yeah, we're excited to be with y'all.
You really bring a wisdom and knowledge to this need we're talking about today, support. Daniel, in your work as an author and as pastors, and seeing the fruit of parenting in the sense of adults being out in the world, finding their place, finding their vocation, their calling. So I'm really excited to hear about your insights. But I think the place to start, I'm just curious to hear what reading about support from that child development perspective, and what your reactions were as parents and as professionals.
For sure. Well, first I have to say I loved, Amy, how you opened up the chapter with your thoughts and everything happening around the year of baking.
Oh, yeah.
For you and your boys, because it has been the year of baking for us too. And I wish actually I had read those stories before, because it has been the year of disaster sometimes. So our children, through watching different Netflix
baking shows,
documentaries and all of that, they have just thought, you know what, this is going to be amazing. Let's do this. And so when Daniel goes to church on Saturday to preach, I have the 3 kids with me, and I thought this would be a wonderful way to be able to connect and get treats out of it. So most of the time it goes really well. One thing you need to know about me is I am a type A parent and person, and I like things clean. So most of the time it goes well, and they are cleaning up and we're having a grand old time. I remember one day I was feeling very, very stressed, and they wanted to bake, and I was like, fine, as long as you do everything and clean up. And in my head, it was basically saying, fine, as long as you could do everything right. And they didn't. They put 2 tablespoons of baking soda instead of 2 teaspoons. And so we ended up having to throw the whole thing away. And I was angry. Like, how dare you get something wrong? And as I'm speaking through this, I don't know if listeners, you've ever had this thought of, you need to shut up. Like, what you're saying to your kids is not going to help. And so as I'm saying this, I'm backtracking. I'm like, okay, I need to take a breath. And so we threw it out, and the kids were crying, and I was upset. And I looked at them and I was like, you know what? Like, Mommy should not have reacted that way. I am so sorry for yelling at you. It was just an honest mistake. And I have made that mistake myself too. Would you like to try again? And they were like, and I was like, well, that chocolate cake really does look good. And that's what we did. We decided to try again, and we worked all together. Reading that, what was your mantra, Amy? It was like, process over perfection.
Right. Process over product.
Yeah, exactly. Process, not the product, because sometimes I'm thinking, well, the process is the product. Like, you have to have both. And so it was a really, really, even for me, to be able to reflect on our year of baking, as in your story too.
That insight, the support, the quote unquote support, or what I'm trying to do here, being driven by our own needs rather than the developmental needs of our kid. Talk more about that, like that sort of catching yourself to say, wait a second, is this really helpful? Where does that come from?
That came from a lot of growth.
Yeah, because I think that's important for parents. Not sure all parents recognize where that comes from in ourselves. What we call over-supporting, going too hard, too much.
Right.
Yeah, what do you know about yourself there?
I would say probably only in the last 2 or 3 years where it's really come apparent. Before that, I was definitely finding my self-worth in my children. And as they were growing up, trying to make them be the best kids they could be, because that would inadvertently look to other people that, wow, Christina is a good parent and she is successful. And through different tools like the Enneagram and even just spending time with God, like, why am I reacting this way to my children? Why, when they fail, I feel like a failure? And why, when they succeed, I feel like I'm on cloud nine because everyone's like, wow, she's such a great mom. And just seeing how that's not right for my kids and that's not right for me. It's not serving them in any way. And being able to take a step back and do a little bit more of inner work, realizing some of it is the way that I was parented, sort of that same when you're successful, your parents look successful. That might be also sort of an Asian thing as well, where you're saving face and you're making sure that you don't do anything that makes your parents look bad, because that would bring shame upon everybody. And so realizing that, how deep rooted that was, and realizing as well that I didn't appreciate that about my parents, even though they did that subconsciously almost, and wanting to break that cycle of what my kids do or how they react is also a sign of maybe kind of what they're asking for too, and being able to enter into that without bringing my need for support or anything from them. And so I think that from that place of being able to take a step back, I'm like, okay, let's reassess the situation. What is going on here, and how can I support my children instead of really getting my children to support me?
Well, and that's the thing, right, Christina? Because I think for most people, we're familiar with this thing called compartmentalization. And I think for most people, there's this sense of, yeah, I compartmentalize, but I'm not really sure if that's a good thing to do. But it kind of just seems like the thing I have to do in order to survive. So for Christina and I, there's very much growing up this sense of, yeah, you got to compartmentalize what life is like inside the home and how you portray life to be outside of the home. Because as Asians, it's like, yeah, we need to save face. We need to everyone else, make sure that they all see that we are healthy, wealthy, have things in control, nothing is going wrong. We cannot be our true selves outside the home. Inside, yeah, all bets are off and we're just going, and then there'll be conflict and all that stuff. But once you leave outside the home, we are one unit and we need to do that. And the fascinating thing is how that has so shaped us. It's so shaped our parenting. But there's always been this underneath the surface. Is that okay? Is that okay? Right? I mean, remember, Christina, like there are these moments where we'll be too supportive or have, gain too much control because we don't want our kids to make mistakes. And then it's like that moment you were talking about with the cake. It's like we see their faces. And in that split second, we're like, oh my goodness, I remember feeling like that. Yeah. And I remember just giving up and not wanting to ever do anything like that again because I don't want to feel that way. So I'm done. I'm going to walk away. And then you see that, right, in your kids, and you're like, oh my goodness, are these neuropathic connections being connected right now to make them prevent ever wanting to take risks, right? So it's in those moments where we're like, oh, okay, we know enough that we're like, okay, we need to stop, we need to pause, we need to reassess. But man, Amy and Jeffrey, there's so much underneath the surface.
Completely. And you're saying about our Asian culture, but also, I mean, you and I grew up in the church.
Yeah, that's right.
And in the Christian culture, and I don't know if you ever hear those stories about like everybody fights on their way to church, but as soon as you open the doors and the greeters are there, hallelujah, right? Like that's we're awesome. The most angelic parents and family ever. So I think there's another layer to that too.
Yeah, what you're saying is so important. I think too, there's a version of that too, right, in the church. It just in our sort of Western Christianity with our faith, that we look a certain way, that we have it together, that our kids are performing in certain ways. And, it's interesting because when I try to explain to people like the research around competency and how children grow into really being competent individuals and owning the competency, like not being competent because they've been made to and are pleasing somebody else so they'll get off their back, but because like, oh yes, this makes sense, I'm good at this, there's value here. The path to that is actually quite messy, like failing and getting it wrong and looking at where it went off without shame is actually how you stay motivated to keep pressing into it. And yet it's still so hard.
And it's not only in our churches, right? I think about that a lot with the cultural moment we're in and social media, right? So there's so much performance. There's so much achievement going on. We have to show people what a great happy family photo we can get. And sometimes we do that, even if things are like a total mess 10 minutes before, but like I want to post so everybody smile, right? So that the world can see. But the fact is, like, so many other people are having hard moments too. So seeing my smiley photo with my kids and them not knowing that 10 minutes before we were an utter and complete mess, well, all that does is it separates us from one another. And it makes us think, well, let's keep performing, let's keep acting, let's keep showing everybody that I'm great.
Try harder.
And it's a real shame. I mean, that's an understatement, right?
Yeah.
It's a real tragedy.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and that's why I love the science and the research in your all's book, especially when you talk about how we are our children's first mirror. And it's interesting because I think underneath the surface there is that sense of, is this okay? Is this not okay? I don't really want my kids like I celebrate when they're actually going in the morning, taking initiative, we're sleeping in, they go make their own breakfast, and we're like, yeah, that's actually a really good thing. And then there's this massive mess up, and we're like,
They spilled all the milk.
exactly. And when we come and like, how are we going to react to that? Right? Are we going to react with anger, or are we going to react to encouragement? Because we have found that, man, it's those moments, right? It's not the children, let's sit down at the dinner table and talk about what kind of family we are going to be and the type of children you are going to turn out. It doesn't work like that. It's those moments where they're like, oh, daddy and mommy are not pleased with what I did. They're not pleased with the initiative that I took to go make myself breakfast. And in our minds, we're like, no, we love the fact that you did that. We just hate the fact that you made that mess and didn't have the initiative to clean up. But they don't have the sophistication and the development to be able to distinguish that.
Yeah, and I think, from that, from a biblical perspective, that whole idea of forgiving 70 times 70, one way to look at that is not like, here it is, another time I will forgive. Now buck up and don't let it happen again. Go and sin no more. Or is it more of like, no, that's a way of being, like, oh, of course you're going to mess up. And so my reaction doesn't need to be this big, and make sure you know the gravity of how you came up short, but rather, oh yeah, okay, well, let's figure out what happened here. Let's rewind the tape, and and that's so hard to enter that. And I think it's a Jesus thing to be able to sit in that comfortable space.
And our kids want to know, I think, Christina, you talked about this in the baking story. Our kids want to know, we give our kids such a gift when we tell them that we also have made and continually make mistakes, right? And we try again. So much of support is like, we try again. Yeah. We go out, we do it again. And I read this gorgeous story online about a teacher who works with autistic kids. And she's always narrating out loud, like, oh, look at that. Like, Mrs. Smith made a mistake. Oh, look at that. I'm going to erase it and I'm going to try it again. And she was talking about one of her little guys who had made a mistake, and he's crying and he's saying, try again, try again, try again. And it was just so beautiful, because what better gift to give our kids than the knowledge that that's kind of what life is about. And another consequence of our performance anxiety is that we're scared to fail, right? So we don't start that first time. The interesting thing that I find is that in the long run, we give them such better chances of overall succeeding or finding a career that they love, or like doing amazing, brilliant things at some distant point in the future, if we don't overreact to their quote unquote failures now really that are really just mistakes that we all
part of the
need
process
to make.
that we
right.
all need to make. That's right. We need to make them.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, very true. And I am the first one to admit that that has been a big growth perspective for me too, because I am one to not want to make mistakes and want to be perfect. And the same thing of just that failure of if I fail, or even have the possibility of failure, I don't want to try. And so being able to reflect and see that in me and then not wanting to place that upon my children or our children of, you know what, mommy's actually scared to try. For example, we have taken up snowboarding this year and they wanted to go down a hill and I had actually taken a big fall on my tailbone and was in a lot of pain and I was really, really scared to go and they wanted to go. And so we had a moment as we're going up the ski hill where I told them, I'm like, you know what, mommy's actually nervous right now about going on the hill again because my butt hurts. And I'm more than that, I'm afraid that I'm going to fall again, but I want to try again because I'm enjoying my time with you and as well as I think I can do it. And so they were cheering. I had the two girls with me, 11 and 9 at the time. They're like, you can do it, mommy. We're going to be with you. And so my daughter had taken a snowboarding lesson before we had gone on. And she was like, let me help you. Let me show you what my teacher, my snowboarding teacher did. And maybe it can help you too. So that was such a beautiful moment together of being able to support one another in that way and hearing, hey, wow, look at mommy.
Yeah.
She she failed,
Yeah.
but she's going to try again.
But you know what's interesting about that is, I mean, for us, we have 3 kids and there's 6 years between the youngest and the oldest. And we all know, I mean, kids are different, adolescent development wise, they're different and they view themselves and they view their parents differently as they age. So even as we're talking about all this, like our youngest, and I'm referring to the apology side of things. Our youngest, he's like, man, dad can do no bad. Like daddy knows everything.
He's the hero.
Yeah, I even remember this one time where, we're talking and I was like, I actually don't know. And he's like, yeah, whatever. And I was like, no, I actually don't know. And he's like, no, you're smiling, you're right. And it's interesting because for them, right, for my 6-year-old, he's taking in the world, right? He's interpreting, he's observing, and then our 11-year-old, I mean, she knows we make mistakes and she knows we are not perfect. Yet when it comes to apologizing, I feel like, because we're talking about support right now, just that simple act of owning up and of apologizing when we make mistakes, I find that demonstrates our support of them and what that mirror looks, how they are to react in moments of failure as well.
Daniel, you've written a book. I think it's important for us to consider about lies that we believe. And a lot of those lies about our identity come from this whole interaction with support as we're growing up as kids. Anything that just would be helpful for our audience to consider. So their future selves, their future kids' selves.
Yeah, I'll probably just narrow in on one of the chapters. So in the book, I unpack this lie that so many of us believe, that you are who you raise. In other words, when our children succeed at something, man, that makes us as parents feel really good. And when they are screaming and yelling and making a huge scene or failing, we often reflect that back onto ourselves. And I feel like just knowing and recognizing and just the simple act of identifying when we fall into that lie is a huge, it's just there's so much movement toward health that we can take when we just first of all recognize that and recognize, my goodness, if we were to play this down the road another 3, 5, 10, 15 years, what is I don't like that. Right, just recognizing that is huge.
Yeah. Thank you for that, because it's easy to miss that, I think. And so having that front of mind, I think, will really help our parents.
And I love being with you all too, because I feel like I resonate with you so much. I mean, so I'm curious, at the end of the book, we talk about each of the needs, and we have a scale. We talked about delight last week, and delight is one that we don't think you can overdo, just to delight in your kids. But support is one that you can overdo in some of the ways that we talked about. So did you find those scales helpful? Like, I found it when Jeffrey brought me those scales, I was like, oh, look at me, really way high up on that support, and maybe I need to let them move towards failing.
Right. I looked at it and I was telling Daniel, I don't remember if any of your audience has used those battery scales where you can put to see how much battery juice you have and it kind of oscillates back and forth and then lands somewhere. That's how I feel with this scale, honestly. There are times where I am so over responsive, as any of your audience can hear some of my stories. You say, oh, she's very high on that. And then sometimes, because I realize that, I will go to the exact opposite. I'll be under responsive, where I'm like, you know what? Fine, you figure it out on your own. You want to make your own mistakes, you want to make a mess, then fine, go ahead. I'm out of here. I'm going to go in my room. You tell me when you've done the dishes. And so having to figure out, like, okay, where is that healthy responsiveness, especially as they grow up, because some places they do need more support than other times, and other ways they do need you to kind of let go of the reins a little bit. So I am continuously kind of going back and forth.
And that's often exactly how it goes. Like the more extreme you are, the more you'll whiplash back in the other direction. And I hope for our listeners, hearing these concepts and engaging with them just says, look, you are going to go back and forth. You are going to move up and down the scale. And there's a health that comes from just recognizing that and trying to be more in the middle, less whiplashing. And and you're going to be who you are, and you can't just change who you are overnight. But the awareness is huge, and just softening the edges of our approach with our children.
Yeah, that's right. For example, it's so funny. I know this is going to be a really dumb example, but my kids and I mean, we, as a bonding thing, we play Nintendo Switch together. Okay. And there's lots of games on Switch, and we've been into this new game called Minecraft Dungeons, which is kind of a dungeon crawler sort of game where you level up and all that, and the four of us will play together. Now the thing is, it's one screen. There's no split screen, so one person, basically we all have to move together. And for me, I mean, I grew up playing games, so I was like, I know what to do. I know that we need to explore. We need to get this. So I have unintentionally just taken full on control. I mean, like, kids, no, we got to stop. We got to go. Stop going that way. We got to come back. And, they've gotten used to it, right? And they're like, yeah, okay. Several times they're like, okay, Daddy, where should we go now? Dad, check the map. What should we do? And when they try to go out on their own, unintentionally, I'm like, stop. We got to go this way, right? And as I was reading through this chapter, I was like, oh my goodness. Like, what am I doing? Like, why can't, it's a video game. Who cares? Like, why can't I actually just let each of them lead, and them to consult the map, and them to figure out where we've been and where we haven't been, and to let them each learn in that way? So literally, I was reading through the book and I was like, okay, next time we play, we're going to take turns, because just in the simple act of this video game, I'm able to demonstrate a healthy responsiveness in supporting them, rather than this like over controlling tendency that I have.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. That's such a great story. Yeah, and that makes me happy to think about, though all of us parents, like, why are we going this way when you obviously, I'm like, no, he's 4 years old. 4 is not a big number. Like, really, time to learn. So we just love being with you. And I wanted to chat as we end our time together. I wanted to ask you something, because as we talk about in the book, the 6 needs of every child are also the needs of all of us humans. We are designed in this way that we have these needs to go out and come back. We all have the need for support, just like our kids have need for support. And something that we've been reading a lot about in the news and talking about with our kids, because their friends are experiencing it, is this growing anti-Asian racism in the world right now. And so I just want to take this moment at the end of our time together and ask, we know that as you think about sending your kids out into the world to face a world that is harder for your kids than it is for our kids. How do we as white parents support you as Asian parents? Do you have anything to share for how we might be able to equip and support our kids as they go out so that they can be standing next to yours with love?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the first thing just to help as parents and for kids to understand is that everyone doesn't see the world the same way. Right, we don't perceive we all have presuppositions, and we all have ways of the ways that we were raised, and a lot of this, I mean, goes into the view that we have of the world, right? So when we look at an act of racism, or when we look at a room and there's 90% white people, 5% Asian people, 5% black people, for example, just as an example, the way the black person and the Asian person is going to see that room is very different than those who would be of majority culture, right? Even from that perspective, and I'm talking more from a Western perspective, but you even flip it and you're like, okay, in Korea, you would have to flip it because it's who is majority culture and who is minority culture, and what have you been used to. I just read yesterday Jeremy Lin, who is probably the most not notorious, that's a bad word, the most famous Asian American basketball player, right? NBA, won the championship. Like, he is a hero for so many. Someone in the league called him coronavirus. Like, they called him corona, like professionals called this guy coronavirus. And I mean, growing up in my hometown in Vancouver right now, like, there's so many acts of racism, and you're just beginning to see so much more of that. So I think and this is for whether you're in a Western context and you're white and you're majority culture, or you're in Korea and you're Korean and you're majority culture, right? So I'm talking more from the perspective of the majority culture piece. You just need to learn how to teach your kids empathy, and to help them place themselves in someone else's shoes. And that, I think that's a life skill that goes beyond the current tension we're experiencing right now. I mean, that's a life skill for your kid to be like, yeah, you know what? Place yourself in the shoes of that child in that classroom who is autistic and who is, like, causing a ruckus, and you see the teacher being super stressed, and you see all of these other kids roll their eyes at this child. Can you have enough empathy to place yourself in that person's shoes and see what they might be feeling? And I think whether it's that situation, or a situation of racism, or a situation of someone being bullied, it's one of those skills that just goes beyond in helping them. But Christina, I mean, you've been, like, I've learned so much of this from you. Like, how have you taught our kids to be empathetic?
I think being able to, as they're young, read stories. A narrative is such a huge part of it, where it's not one, whether it's white, black, Asian, that they're not just the hero of the story, and it's not over and over and over again. So being able to be really aware of the books that we're reading together, whether they're studying it at school or even just reading around our dinner table, of like, who is the hero of the story,
That's right.
and who is always the hero of the story. And maybe as parents, why are we always choosing those books where a certain culture is the hero of the story? And being able to reflect back about that, to be able to share that. I think the whole empathy thing comes to also of, like, understanding we are all made in the image of God. And what does that mean? What does it mean to love God and love others? Well, sometimes that means, not just praying. It means standing up. And if somebody else is being bullied for whatever number of reasons, being like, hey, God, what is my role in here? Do I step in? Am I supposed to call the teacher? Am I supposed to be like, you know what? That's wrong. We can't do this to this person. She is a human being as well. And so having that role of, hey, we all have an opportunity. God is all calling us to do something. Sometimes it's prayer. Sometimes it's asking questions. Sometimes it's using our voice to be able to rally around those who feel unheard and unseen. So it's having those type of conversations in an environment where we can, our children, same thing with the vulnerability of being able to ask questions of us, and being able to struggle in that together. And hey, we don't have all the answers, but what is the next step that we can take together as a family?
Yeah, and I don't want to neglect what it says in Micah 6:8, right? Act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God, right? It's that last piece right? Because I think there's so much in our world today, especially with pandemic, quarantine, shutdowns, all of this, where there's just this growing tension to, and we live in an age of outrage, right? Where hate is commoditized and it sells, and people are going to be more apt to be against something than for something, right? And yeah, you know what? There is that inner side of, yeah, as followers of Christ, we need to act justly. We need to love mercy. And if there's an act of racism in your classroom or at work, or an act of hate, right, and bullying and such, yeah, we as followers of Christ need to act justly and love mercy. We need to do that. But we also need to do it humbly, right? We need to do it humbly. And we need to recognize that, hey, we are not the judge. Jesus is the judge. So how do we, in those moments, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, not quick to react, fast to get angry and then figure it out later, right? It's that ongoing tension of, yeah, we need to be just, but yes, we are not the judge. Yeah, we need to love mercy and be aware and grow in empathy, but we also need to walk humbly. So there is that tension that as parents we need to demonstrate, but we also need to parent our children toward that end too.
Right. And I'll end with this story, but then because we always like the nitty gritty. So I grew up in a white majority culture, especially in school. I think I was maybe 3 Asians out of a school of 400. And I remember telling my parents, like, please just pack a sandwich. Don't pack anything that would make me look weird, right? And sometimes my parents just didn't have bologna. They had to go out and buy bologna, but they didn't have that. So we just packed what we had the night before. And I remember sitting at the table with my other classmates, this is in grade 2, and being afraid of opening my lunchbox because of what people might say. Oh, it smells. Oh, what is that? That looks like hair. How can you eat hair? All of that. And so honestly, how beautiful it would have been, and how even healing it would have been, even in grade 2, if I did not have to worry about opening up my lunchbox in front of people, because they would be like, whoa, that's cool. What is that? Instead of, that's strange, that's weird, that smells. Right. Being like, wow, can you tell me more about that? How did your mom cook? What is in there? Or like, can I try some? That looks different, but it looks awesome and it smells good. And even that practical example of, hey, it's different, but different doesn't have to mean bad. Different can mean good too.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that story. Something that I think about with our own kids is preparing them for that moment. I think that's all that you're saying, reading the books, having the conversations, preparing them. Something that I was just talking with our 10-year-old about the other day is we are often the only Jesus that people will see. We carry that love within us wherever we go, and we have the opportunity to be love for our neighbors. But we also need to understand it is natural to freeze. If we see someone being mistreated, we don't need to be ashamed of any fear that might come up in us. If we see a maybe more powerful person, a more popular person saying something that we know is not full of love, it is natural to be scared. So what we also try to do is prepare them with some words like, hey, that's not cool. Hey, I don't agree with that. He doesn't deserve that. Or come alongside the friend. Why don't you come play with me? Just come alongside. Hey, like what you're saying, tell me what's in your lunch. That looks cool to me. Even though all my kids are such picky eaters, I'm really good. I'm glad you gave me that, because I'm like, all right, this is a good one to know, these picky eaters who just like peanut butter and jelly. I think it's the preparation, it's the preparing, and then also giving them the purpose. Like, what do we, the Micah passage, this is who we are, this is an identity that we can go out into the world, and I think that's a confidence that we'll build in them over time.
Yeah, and our listeners may be like, well, what does this have to do with support per se? But each of these needs that we talk about at Compass, they bleed into the next need beside it in different ways, and the next need is boundaries, and a big center of boundaries is competence in like, you are not alone in the world. You live with others. And what does it look like? How do I prepare you to live with others and as Christians in a particular way? And there is a training for that. Let's think about that scenario. How do I teach my children moral bravery? What does that actually look like? And it's going to be little steps, one little bit at a time, but just the conversation is a step in from support into boundaries. And yeah, it actually flows quite smoothly.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe and share. For an in-depth look at the concepts we discussed today and stories about our family's journey, check out our book, The 6 Needs of Every Child: Empowering Parents and Kids Through the Science of Connection. You'll find illustrations of the compass there. We've heard from parents and teachers who want a copy of the compass to hang up, so we've also created a PDF that's available for download at growingconnected.com. As we close out this episode, I'm excited to let you know about the chance you have right now to keep Growing Connected going strong and encouraging you in your parenting journey. After all, parenting is a journey, right? And it's not always an easy one. You and I need each other, and we also need constant daily reminders of God's love. That's why Growing Connected has partnered with Christian Parenting, which helps produce and distribute our show. Christian Parenting is an online ministry that's helping over 500,000 parents a month find freedom in being the perfectly imperfect parents they were meant to be. And today I want to ask you to give a generous donation to help keep Christian Parenting and Growing Connected going strong. Make a donation today by texting CPGIVE to 474747. You can also give by visiting cpgive.org. When you give, you'll be entered into a drawing to win the Perfectly Imperfect Parenting Bundle, which is full of great parenting resources to encourage you and your kids. And now may the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, find you and hold you today. May you be strengthened and encouraged in ways that surprise you, and may you and your family experience moments